Okay, I think it's working now. Um, so again, for the sake of the recording, we're going to typography in design, first part. L'chaim, friends, let's do this together.
Typography plays one of the biggest roles in design by setting the mood and tone for a design piece. Type can be
Is that
loud
okay?
or it can be soft. It can be bold. It can be subtle. It can create a sense of elegance or grace, or it can create a sense of urgency. First of all, typography is the art or technique of displaying words or text in a readable, digestible, and appealing way. This is an art form for a reason, as typefaces can be arranged in so many ways it can seem overwhelming for any designer at first. Typefaces are groups of fonts that share a similar style or characteristic. Take for instance Times New Roman. This very popular typeface consists of different fonts. These fonts consist of different sizes and weights, but they're all part of the same Times New Roman typeface. Font is a term you hear most often and refers to one of the many fonts that make up a whole typeface or type family. Sometimes when people say, "I found a really cool font," they really mean they find a really cool typeface, as font refers to just one style or weight of any given font in any given typeface. So each font is broken down further, and it's a collection of glyphs which represent an individual character, number, or punctuation mark. Typefaces are split up into several main classifications. Serif fonts are fonts that have these little tails or accents at the end of each letter stem. These accents make smaller type easier to read, and that's why you see serif fonts, like a Times New Roman, appear frequently in books and smaller printed text, as it's easier for the eye to make out the character because of those little tails and little serifs. Sans serif fonts, sans meaning without in French, is without those little serifs or without those little accents or tails at the end. A classic example of a sans serif font will be Helvetica. You may have seen Helvetica used in public transportation systems. The New York subway, for example, uses Helvetica as its main typeface. These make for great headlines because of the simplicity and clean lines. Because they have more simple and clean appearance, they do not compete with the other design elements as much as a serif font would. Script fonts take on a whole nother life. With beautiful curves and stroke weights, they could be very precise with defined structure, or they could be fun and handwritten and take on a very unique characteristic. Script fonts can be one of the harder fonts to use because they demand attention, and certain script fonts can be hard to read for someone who may not speak the language as their primary language. Some scripts look fantastic with certain letter combinations. Some may have strange looking letters or characters, and they may be hard to work with or line up properly. With the advent of the iPad and Apple Pencil, now it's easier than ever to write out your own headline and script lettering. Hand lettering is a custom version of a script font written out by pen, pencil, and vectorized and isolated in Photoshop or another editing program. Sometimes a handwritten font can appeal to a particular audience. They can look custom and authentic, giving the design a very unique look. The last main typeface category is decorative. These feel more like graphics instead of type. Grunge is a popular variation of this typeface category. These typefaces are so detailed that they can even stand alone as a statement, without the need for photos or other design elements because of their detail. But be careful not to overuse. They can easily be overwhelming if not used correctly. To understand how to use typography in design, we need to first understand the anatomy of typography. Up next, we'll find out exactly which terms you need to know.
Typography has a special place in the world of design, and it can dramatically impact the way a design feels. It can make a design look busy or clean. It might even be the design itself. Through understanding the anatomy and structure of typography, it goes a long way in deepening your understanding of design. This is a serif font. We know this because of the little brackets at the end of the characters. And each letter of this word is called a character. If you were to draw a line that hugs the bottom of each letter, not including the little tails, which are called the descenders, this line would be called your baseline. You can also draw a line across the top of these characters, which does not include what's called the ascenders, or this little area right here, and then you can draw your second baseline. What are between these two lines is the very core of your word or character, and this can help you find balance in your type. You may find you have more ascending than descending characters, and this revelation can help you decide how to balance this type in a headline or a logo, for example. The line that can be drawn at the top on the tip top of your ascenders is called the ascent line. The line that can be drawn across the bottom of your descenders is called the descent line, so hopefully that can be easy to remember. With a really good font, you'll be able to draw these nice ascending and descending lines across the top and the bottoms, but not all fonts or typefaces work that way. Script fonts, like this one, don't always follow this nice lined pattern. Now let's go over some basic typography vocabulary. The tail is the very tip of the character. The descender area, which we now know takes up the bottom half, the tail is just the very tip of the character. This is an example of the stem of the character. Ears are anything that expands outside of the character, like in this example of the G. Fortunately, you'll notice a lot of typography terms are named after human anatomy, so as you can guess, this H is a great example of a shoulder. Loops are common in certain font characters. Anything that's completely closed inside a character is called a closed counter. This is an example of a character leg. Crossbars join two stems together, for example, in this A. There are hundreds of different terms and vocabulary words for describing typography anatomy. I'm not going to learn them all, and you don't have to know them all, but it's great to be familiar with some of the basic vocabulary. That means knowing some of the basics is fantastic, but don't feel like you have to know every single term and memorize it. What's most important is studying how type feels, looks, and behaves with other characters, words, and colors and designs to make our overall pieces cohesive and balanced. I'll go over a few terms that are must-know terms in the world of graphic design. Many of these phrases and terms are thrown around in client emails and professional feedback you may receive. Kerning is the manual created space between each character. Each type has a natural kerning added to it. When you manually reduce or expand the spacing between the characters using software like we'll use in the class, you'll get the term kerning. In logo design, for example, I always try to manually kern type characters because even just slight adjustments can make a big impact on how it looks. The default spacing on fonts is not always perfect. Also, kerning can help balance the logo by increasing or decreasing the space created between characters. Tucking that letter in to reduce that extra white space can elevate your type in your design. I love to experiment with different font options when doing logos and headlines. Some fonts work really well for my desired look, beautiful serifs, tails, and loops. But take, for instance, these fonts. Notice how they look pretty similar at first glance, but they vary quite a bit when you zoom in and you look for the little details. The spacing between sentences or phrases is called leading. The amount of leading between sentences in a larger paragraph can really change the look and feel of a block of type. Larger spacing or leading between sentences can look very clean. Tighter spacing can feel pretty cramped. When you are learning intermediate or advanced design techniques, you'll need to know how to manually space and balance logos, headlines, and custom lettering. When working on headlines or type, I like to tighten the spacing between characters or words. I try to find opportunities to put words and characters in nice white spaces, almost like a puzzle piece, and it seems to work really well that way when I do that. We can do this easily in Adobe Illustrator. I'm taking a simple 3-word headline and finding the right spacing between the characters and the words. You'll notice a big difference using the default spacing in the font and then using my own custom spacing. There seems to be a big difference when I really start to play and noodle around with it. Sometimes your main headline and phrase is the biggest focus of your design, and having a nice custom tailored look to your typography goes a long way in making it look professional. It's also good practice to combine different font types and styles in the same headline. So in this case, taking our less important words and making them smaller and in italics, and pairing it with a nice script font and combining that together, and also using the sans serif font, it really works well together. Also, tucking in words and reducing large amounts of white space between the characters and letters makes it seem more like a cohesive design. Custom lettering is very important in logo design and branding. In this case, I'm taking 2 script fonts and combining them together to make one unique word. Script fonts can be tricky. If you don't like how a script font looks with the first capital letter, you can always take another script font and use that as the first capital letter if you like how that looks a little bit better. So in this case, switching out that first letter makes it more readable. You can take a typical font and use it as your base font. From there, you can add something unique or distinct to make it your own type and make it unique to your brand. I have a wonderful downloadable resource that goes along with this lesson that contains an anatomy of typography poster that goes over a lot of the terms we went over in this lesson and more. I hope to give you some insight on some commonly used typefaces that you can add to your font collection to help make picking fonts much easier for your design projects. At one time, I had over 1,000 different fonts installed. I use only a small handful, and I suggest you keep a special list of 20 to 30 hand-picked commonly used fonts you can use on projects. Not only will it help you be consistent, but also help picking those fonts out for the next project a lot easier for you. In the serif typeface category, there are several wonderful choices. Obviously, Times New Roman is the default serif font that you see on most programs like Microsoft Word, for example. But have you heard of Didot, Bakersville, Garamond? What are the difference between all of these, and how do I know when to use which one in a particular project? To better understand this, we need to go back way in time to the first uses of serif fonts as we know them today. There are 4 main categories of serif fonts: old style, transitional, Didone, and slab serifs. These are listed in order and when they were first used in history. Old style was used a long time ago when publishing was really just getting started. Italian printers were interested in creating a type that was easy to read for book printing. Old style typefaces are very easy to read in printed form, and that's because there's not a large difference in contrast in the thickness of the lines or strokes. Some great examples of old style fonts are Garamond, Berkeley, Minion, and Palantino. The next evolutionary step serifs made was a move into transitional. Transitional was established in the mid-18th century, and they are between old style and modern fonts, therefore the name transitional. The contrast or the difference between the thickness of the lines and the characters are more dramatic with transitional serifs. Instead of harsh endings, transitional fonts tend to end with ball terminals. Ball terminals are the rounded ends of the type stems, as opposed to the rough end, as in this example. Times New Roman is a classic example of a transitional font. Didone, or the modern serif, is the next step in its history. These are characterized by even more dramatic contrast between the thickness and thinness of the lines in the typeface. Didot is a common and readily used example of a Didone or modern serif. Bondoni is another wonderful example, and it's commonly found in design programs as a default option. Take for instance Canva. It has this font available as a default selection. Didones or modern serifs are highly stylized, and it's no wonder they're commonly found in high-end fashion brands. Because there is a high contrast between the thickness and thinness of the lines, you can put more dramatic spacing between the characters to create a dramatic effect. A lot of major brands use dot as their typeface of choice, such as Vogue and also CBS, which is a major broadcasting company. I personally tend to pick a modern serif font when working for high-end clients, as those thinner lines seem to add a more beautiful elegance that's hard to achieve with an old-style serif font. They can also be good for dramatic poster headlines with simple, solid backgrounds. The last stop in the history of serif fonts is the slab serif. Very different from its predecessors, this font was originally designed to demand one's attention on poster designs. They have very thick, bold lines with almost zero contrast. Chunky, thick, and bold, they certainly grabbed our attention throughout the years. They even used slab serifs on wanted posters back in the Old West to make sure you took notice. And designers use slab serifs for the same reason. If you have a political statement, a slab serif might be a good way to command one's attention. Rockwell is a great example of a slab serif. The IBM logo uses a custom font very close to Rockwell. Archer and Archer Pro are both slab serifs I commonly use in my design projects, and you can see a similar font being used by a large bank called Wells Fargo. We had a wonderful dive into serif typefaces. Now let's check out sans serif typefaces. Make sure you download the downloadable resource in this lesson that includes some of my favorite picks for certain types of styles of typography. Of course, collect your own list and make your own so that you can always have a list to go to when you're doing client projects.
Sans serif fonts have a special place in design. The word sans in French means without serifs. In the past 20 years, serif fonts have taken a backseat to sans serif fonts. Sans serif fonts tend to have a more modern, clean, and sleek appearance, but they can sometimes lack the subtle elegance or charm needed in a particular situation. But if you want a modern, clean look, then a sans serif might become your best friend. Sans serif fonts are fonts that like the serif or tails or accents at the end of characters. Clean and simple, these can have some benefits over serif fonts in many situations. They can convey a sense of modernism and minimalism. Sans serif fonts originated at a much later date than its serif predecessor. That's because the use of digital and computer screens required a more clean and simple font. Back when computers had a low-resolution display, the small details in serif fonts were lost, and thus the need for a more simple sans serif font. Sans serif fonts are fantastic for big, bold headlines. Take, for instance, this poster design. A serif font just does not have the high-impact modern design I'm going for. The sans serif font works perfectly and matches the overall theme of the poster. Sans serifs work great for headlines, but for small body copy that comes in large blocks of text, they can sometimes get lost. They are great for websites and digital mediums, and that's what they're designed for. But for print projects that require large blocks of text, sometimes a serif font works a little better, but it depends on the mood and style you're going for. It's hard not to mention a sans serifs without mentioning Helvetica. A sans serif like Helvetica works well with tight spacing. All sans serifs, especially when lowercase, work very well with tight spacing or gaps between the characters. Futura is a geometric style of sans serif. They tend to be mathematically precise, with its perfect round curves and circles. The Google logo is very close to Futura, although they added their own flair, of course. Dolce & Gabbana use Futura Demi Bold as their typeface of choice. Avant-Garde is a font you may have seen several times in your lifetime, as they use that in all lowercase for the Adidas logo. Also notice that it's all lowercase and they're using tight spacing, and this looks nice and works really well. Many companies that try to reinvent themselves in the modern era will sometimes switch their font from a serif to a sans serif to show an adaptation to the digital modern world. Google is a great example of this in action. I remember seeing the old Google font in the early days of the internet with its old style serif font. Of course, after a recent rebrand, they switched to a sans serif font, and it really helps to make the logo feel more sleek, fresh, and revitalized. Now that we know some of the basic typefaces and some of their uses in design, we're ready to learn about how to space them, learn what kerning is, and how font weights can dramatically impact a design's mood and feel. Many typefaces have different font styles and weights. Font weights come in many flavors. Some typefaces have a wide variety of weight choices, with some fonts only have a few. I love using a font like Railway or a Gill Sans because they offer a full suite of weight choices. Font weights impacts a design by emphasizing the appearance of a font, by making it bold or making it light. Bold weights are strong, have high impact, and grab your attention. They almost convey a sense of yelling or talking in a louder voice that can help you highlight what is most important to the viewer. Call to actions are usually in a bold weight, as those are very important to highlight to the viewer. Lighter weights, especially the lightest, which would be a thin weight, can feel streamlined and modern. They could be a way to highlight something by being soft and subtle. Take, for instance, something like Cancer, not something you want to yell out to the world, as it could be scary, but a thinner weight choice looks nice here, almost calming the viewer instead of making them feel provoked. Lighter or thin weights cannot be too small in size. I usually do not make them smaller than 8 points, as lighter fonts tend to be hard to read at a certain size level. There are lighter weights, bold weights, and now everything in between, which are your regular and semi-bold weights. Regular weights are perfect for body copy. Using a bold weight for body copy can make it seem loud and distracting, especially if there's a large block of text. I want to talk about spacing in design. Spacing can have a great impact on how type is not only perceived, but creates the tone for the design piece. Wide or tight spacing. That's the big decision a designer needs to make when working with type in headlines. Wide spacing between a few words, or a single word for example, can elevate the type to make it seem more elegant and high-end. Wide spacing in a longer phrase or paragraph can seem a little overwhelming. Tighter spacing can make a design have a sense of urgency. It could also help make a strong type seem cohesive and connected. Wider spacing in lowercase letters almost never works well. I suggest if you're going to do a headline or a phrase with wider spacing to make sure you use uppercase, as uppercase characters stand alone stronger than lowercase, as they're more balanced and heavy in structure. As we reviewed before, kerning is a term used for the manual spacing between characters. Kerning is very important, as not all characters in a font will have perfect spacing by default. Sometimes an A and a W will need to have the spacing closed just a hair for them to feel more connected. This is an example of me manually adjusting the spacing between characters in Adobe Illustrator. Just small tweaks in the spacing can make a word or phrase feel more polished than just the default spacing. We also reviewed in an earlier lesson, the spacing between sentences is called leading. You can see how having wide spacing or leading between the sentences can affect the overall look and feel of a block of copy. Wide spacing in a smaller block of copy can help the block of text expand to a larger part of the design, if there's plenty of white space to cover, of course. Tight spacing can help the block of text feel more together and read more as one unit. Of course, with anything in design, there's a thing as too much or too little. Be careful about your leading. It can make or break your design. A good rule to follow is to use tighter spacing or leading in short 2 or 3 line subheadings or headlines. Wide spacing between only 2 or 3 sentences can make the second or third lines feel kind of disconnected and not appealing to the eye. When it comes to alignment and typography, you have many weapons in your arsenal. Nothing beats the power of left alignment in anchoring text and providing a strong balance in your design. Especially with longer headlines and phrases, left alignment can make longer text more stable and grounded in feeling. If I center align the same block of text, it seems to lose something. Center alignment with shorter words and phrasing can be very powerful though. Right alignment can still be useful though, although I use this alignment the least when it comes to typography. Even when it makes sense to use right alignment like in this example, sometimes it has a stronger anchor point using left alignment. There's something about reading from left to right that is challenged when you try a right alignment. I do think that right alignment can still be used to help balance out designs. Take for instance this photo. I left aligned the phrase of color to help balance the overall design. The design is heavy on the left because of that photo. The right alignment of the phrase of color helps to counter that strong left-sided photo and creates an overall balance in the piece, so it does not feel heavy on one side or the other. Alignment doesn't always have to be the same throughout the entire headline. Sometimes you can have a little fun and break the mold by trying a right, left alignment, as long as the words flow in order down the page and are legible. Also, do not feel like text has to go in straight lines. They can have curves, bends, and show movement like in this example, where the typography surrounds the subject. Text can also wrap around objects to show movement. It feels like the type and the photo belong together as one. They are one cohesive design unit, and that's a wonderful thing. If we can somehow fuse design elements together like this, it helps people get almost immersed into the design, and it makes our job easier communicating complex ideas and information in simple ways. The cool and trendy thing to do in design today is to have text go behind objects, like they're weaving in and out of layers and becoming one unified element. Be careful to make sure any text you put behind objects is legible and readable. The last thing you need is a really clever, cool headline hidden behind a photo that the viewer cannot read. It would be a shame. But you can do incredible things by having the text and objects interacting in this layered way. Magazines do this all the time with their front covers. Sometimes vital letters are covered up, but you could still make out what the word is or phrase because it's very obvious. Take for instance this watermelon graphic. You know it says watermelon even though two vital characters are covered by it. The photo matches the words, so your brain fills in the gaps of information. You can always have an object break up words in a phrase like this example. It is fun to play with type and photos together. In design, making things playful, fun, unique, and interactive are all part of the goal. Understanding that playful nature is something that takes time to master. Play around with different photos and type and practice this playful dance. The golden rule in design is to follow strong type hierarchy. Type hierarchy is the order of specific design elements in order of their importance. Usually, the headline is the most important thing in a design. It's often bigger for this reason. Or you may use a typeface that is strong or bold, or perhaps even a different color. Next up is your subtitle. You may not need a subtitle for all designs, but it helps to break up a large body of information by having one or two lines stand out in the beginning or be a bit larger. Your body copy is usually next and contains the smallest text size outside of your small print. We will want to make it short and enticing for those who are interested in reading more. Back in the 1950s, during the golden age of advertising, the body copy was where the lion's share of the sales language would go, and it was important for the viewer to read to understand the overall theme of the ad and maybe even find out how that photo is connected to the product. Last but not least is call to action. This is usually toward the end, but it actually has the most important job to call the viewer to some sort of action. Buy this product, limited time sale, visit the website for more information. This needs to be bold, perhaps another color to offset it as it's an important item in the overall hierarchy. We put it last because we want to pitch or sell our idea or service or product before they see the call to action. I usually make this slightly smaller than the headline so it doesn't compete, but larger than the subtitle. Type hierarchy is seen in its full beauty in editorial design. With a clear sense of type hierarchy in every article, page, and spread, these are wonderful examples. If you ever want to study type hierarchy, pick up a magazine and start to notice the theme we just went over. Time and time again, it works, and that's why they have this standard of layout. As designers, our biggest job is to help people digest large amounts of information. Sometimes our job is easy because the amount of information we need to put into a given design is minimal, but that's not always the case. People love to cram large amounts of info into small areas, and the results are almost never good. I like to KISS, or keep it simple, stupid. Find ways to cut your copy and text down. Find ways to combine sentences or have only one call to action. Say more with photos instead of type if need be. Anything you could do to make it easier for people to digest the most important information first. How do you create a nice synergy between font, photos, and design elements? What makes a compelling layout? I created a quick flyer for a gym with some generic promotions. What makes this layout work well? First off, it starts with a large, obvious headline or main attention grabber. It is a nice, clean sans serif font with a little spacing between the characters to add a little breathing room. It is obviously the main initial draw of the flyer. It is white, so it has the highest contrast color against the dark background of the entire ad. Try to make sure your headlines are not too long. It is nice to break them up and put the remaining, not as important part of the headline in a smaller subline text. I brought out the green to connect it with the bottom of the piece so it seems like there's one consistent color scheme. A powerful photo always works wonders. In this case, it's more of a dramatic black and white photo with a little bit of a green hue filter on it. Once again, to tie in our colors. It is not larger than the headline, so it provides a nice balance for the layout. When you have a good bit of information to deal with on one small flyer, it is best to have a way to divide up that information so it's not overwhelming or busy. I highlighted some of the text with green that I thought was more important. Any way to help the viewer break down a lot of information will help dramatically with the overall feeling of the design, and color is a way to do that. We have an obvious call to action. It is our main theme color of green, with a nice high contrast black. There is spacing between the lettering so it has a chance to stretch further across the bar and have some breathing room. I have now shown the viewer where to go for their next steps. You do not come up with this kind of layout on your first shot. It takes some playing around with the main graphic elements to find out what seems to click. I struggled with the right headline font and placement for a while until I figured out that it was the photo that needed modified. And once I kind of tweaked the photo a little bit, the headline seemed to really fall in place. I'm in Canva today, and I wanted to show you this flyer. That's a default selection in Canva, and I wanted to show you why it works and show you type hierarchy in action. So the first thing that pops out to me is the name Urbana. So that's obviously the main name and attraction of this flyer. And of course it's big, and it's obvious, and it's a nice, simple sans serif font. And notice below is kind of more of a subtitle, so it's a little bit smaller than the headline. And they also used a very similar, in the same type family, a little bit of a bolder version to have it stand out even though it's smaller. And then next you have a really nice dividing line, which helps break up the text boxes a little bit so it doesn't feel like you have several blocks of type stacked on top of each other. So sometimes a nice dividing box, a little element, graphic element, can help kind of divide multiple boxes of text. You'll notice that the little bit less important of information is at the very bottom, and it's in the same font family. This entire thing is in the same font family, and it's a lighter weight, and so it de-emphasizes it a little bit. It's the date and time, which is important, but selling the name and what the workshop actually is more important. So you can see some wonderful type hierarchy used on this flyer. This flyer actually has a backside, and they were able to make the front nice and clean and put more detailed information on the backside. And so you'll notice the very top, we don't really need a headline because we've already sold them on the front side with a big, larger Urbana. So you notice how it's a tiny bit smaller compared to on the front. And we re-emphasized the subline right below, and then you have a nice block of what you would call body copy, which repeats all the main information and the location. And notice the call to action. It's probably one of the boldest weights used on this flyer, and for good reason. Notice how they use the yellow-orange color to also highlight it among all the other white type used in the body copy. Overall, this flyer has really strong type hierarchy, and notice how there's a lot of information and lots of blocks of copy, but there seems to be some kind of order, and it really is pleasing to the eye. This example is another great case of solid type hierarchy. Notice the big, bold sans serif headline, and notice how it's on only 2 lines, and the spacing or the gap between the 2 lines is a little bit tighter. There's not a wide gap there, so it reads as one nice coherent line. You also notice the subheading, a special birthday treat from us. If that was all one headline in the same font, it would be kind of overwhelming. So they made it a smaller size, but they still made it a bold weight to still make it stand out among the much smaller body copy. And so we have the body copy, which has that lighter, thinner weight, and it pairs really nice with that bolder, weighted subline above it. So the website at the bottom would be your call to action, and you notice how it's a little bit bigger than the body copy, but it doesn't overwhelm the headline or compete with the headline at all. You'll also notice that it's in all capital letters, and there's a little bit of spacing or kerning between the characters. So it gives a little breathing room, and it helps it stretch across the page and helps it kind of anchor it with the rest of the text. You'll also notice all the text is center aligned, and so it kind of has a certain consistency throughout the piece, and it makes the overall piece feel balanced. So you'll notice our most important information is available flavors. That titles the back of this flyer to let us know what we're getting ready to read, and you'll notice it's a nice bold sans serif font. And notice the gaps between the 2 lines are somewhat tighter, so it reads as one unit, available flavors. You'll notice this is quite a bit of information, but they were able to break it down into different categories to help my eye break it all down. They've also bolded the first title in each one of these 3 categories to also provide some balance, but also to help me break each one of those down even further. You also notice the balance of all caps and then lowercase. So the body copy has lowercase characters, and the top headline, let's take for example chocolate, is in uppercase. And notice how it has a nice balance. It helps to divide the information and separate the title and the body copy even further by making it a little bit different with the type and the type of capitalization that's being used. I hope you now have a better understanding of how type hierarchy works and how you can utilize it to create better, more polished designs.
Font pairing is critical in finding the right balance between font choices, and by the end of the lesson we'll pair together several font types to find nice harmonies between our type. Some fonts tend to pair very well together. Sans serif and serif fonts tend to work well as a pairing. The reasoning behind this is when you pair 2 very similar fonts together, in this example Helvetica and Open Sans, which are both sans serifs, it's hard for someone to tell the difference between the 2. But there's just enough difference where the viewer wonders why there's not more consistency between the 2 fonts. A great rule to follow in pairing fonts is making sure the fonts you pair have enough contrast between them. Try pairing a sans serif with a serif. Pair an all capital word with a lowercase word. Try pairing a script font with an all bold sans serif font. Try pairing a script font with a slab serif font. Pairing 2 script fonts together can be tough, but there are times when a particular headline or design piece can get away with it, but you have to be careful. Font pairing is like a dance, and it can take a little time to find the right pairing. It also depends on the length of the phrase or headline. With headlines, you can be more playful and flexible with your font options. Body copy and longer blocks of copy, you have to be careful not to overwhelm the viewer with too many font pairings. I like to keep font pairings to only 2 to 3 total in a design piece. I try to pick a good headline font, a simple body copy font, and a third complementary font for variety. Make sure you check out the downloadable resource in this lesson for the font pairing guide, where I show you a couple of great examples of font pairing in action.
All right, so for our first graphic, we're going to just do a very simple phrase, so a three-word phrase, big, bold headline. We're going to play around with these separate little text elements to find a really cool looking headline. So we're going to use everything we've learned from our typography lessons to make this happen. So right now I'm looking at my background photo. This is the background photo I'd like to use for this graphic. And so that'll really kind of determine what we could do with our type. And right now it's a pretty even background. There's a lot of different leaves on there, but there's not a subject matter that's in focus. So we could kind of be a little bit more bold with our type. So you notice I went ahead and split these up into different lines because I want to do some different type treatments with each one. So it's going to be big is going to be first, bold, headline. So I want to do a play on words. So I think I want to make this the biggest item. And so let's increase the font size a little bit. And this is where it gets a little tricky. We want to try to find the right font choice for this. And I'm thinking maybe a sans serif that's bold. So when I think of a bold sans serif, and I'm just going to go, this is the Canva selections of font by default. So we're a little bit limited, but so Anton, that's a very condensed sans serif font. That's great. That is beautiful. So now the next thing I'm going to do is adjust the spacing between the characters. Let's see what I need to do. I kind of like a tighter fit, but we'll see how it looks. So there's big and bold. I almost wonder if I could do that as a script font because that would pair really well and kind of be something that breaks from the sans serif font. So let me do lowercase, all lowercase. And let's see if we can't find a script font that would pair very well with this. That's a little bit, that's not script per se, it's decorative. Let's try this one. Okay, I think since this is so big and it's all cap, keeping that in lowercase is probably what I should do. So let's find another font. Allura. Let's try this one. It's a little too stylized. I almost want like a handwritten font if I can find it. This is kind of a very popular look, but it's sometimes hard to read. And see, the boldness of bold is kind of fighting with the boldness of the big. So I want kind of a skinnier script font. So now I'm really honing in on the type of font that I'm really interested in. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of trial and error to find the right pairing. And also I'm going to take my image and I'm just going to apply a little filter to it to make it a little easier to read the type in white. So I'm reducing the contrast and that helps the whiteness of the type pop out a little bit better. I think that was also an issue, that the background was a little bit too detailed and the contrast was a little bit high on that. So just made some adjustments. So now I'm going to find script font. And I know Canva has a lot of great font selections, but and you can also import your own fonts. So I'm just trying to work with what they have by default. So I'm going to continue to find the right font, so just hold on tight. So spending about 5 to 10 minutes with this, I decided to switch things up a little bit and make bold the very bold sans serif and actually pair it with a serif font. Because if I used another serif font for up top, they competed with each other. So you'll notice this has a little serifs, and I tried to find one with a thin weight. So I believe this is an ultra weight, which is very, very lightweight. Martel Ultra Light, and I'm pairing that with a bold. So you'll notice how both of these are white, and this kind of gets lost. So I'm going to make one a different color. So let's just go and pick kind of a generic color. Let's just do a light gray. We can always adjust it later. And so you'll kind of see the differences between the two types. And I want to adjust the spacing because anytime you have a lowercase, any kind of lowercase characters, you don't want to have too much spacing between them because they just don't connect or feel connected. So I'm just going to go to spacing. I'm just going to bring that in just a little bit, just like that. And you know it would look even better if I can find an italic that's just like that. Not all of them come with an italic. And I don't always like the italic of certain serif fonts. So I'm back and I decided to find a serif font that had italics. and that was the Bakersfield font, which is an old style serif font. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. So now we have our last third piece here. So we have a lowercase, we have kind of an all caps. What do we do with this one here? I would probably think, since these are so powerful, let's make this a little more subtle. So I'm going to make this perhaps in all caps, and I'm going to put some more space in between the characters on this one. So I can just widen this a little bit and just go to spacing. Just really stretching this out because I don't want to make it large. But I also want to keep it flush with the second line. So you'll kind of see how it lines up a little bit. And I am going to have to adjust the font a little. I haven't changed that or messed with that yet. I'm just going to noodle around with this and try to find the right location. So this does need to be a little bit more bold. So we can always try to use a similar font that we used up here, so there's not too many fonts being used. But in headlines, you can break that rule because headlines are supposed to be a little bit more creative. Now let's try this one. That's a possibility. I can always reduce the spacing and reduce the size to have it fit under there. But there's something about this that seems off. So this is a sans serif, and this is a serif font. I don't know about that serif font. It's just not I'm just not feeling it. So I do feel like this needs to be a sans serif font. So let's find a medium weight sans serif font to kind of go there. Let's catamaran medium. Let's give this a try. Ah, beautiful. And I think that has just enough thickness for it to remain readable even though it's smaller. Let's just continue to make this bigger or increase the spacing to help us stretch and make it flush with the one above. So great, I think our headline is there. We can always mess around with alignment and size, kind of tweaking it a little bit. So right now the G is tucked behind. We can make this an uppercase B, or I kind of like it a lowercase. So there's kind of one headline option. Of course, we can make several different options, so I'm just going to group these guys together. So we're going to up the challenge level a little bit. We're going to work with a much longer phrase. So these are a little bit more challenging to work with, but it'll challenge our skills a little bit. So I have this little inspirational quote. I'm going to go ahead and make it white so it's going to stand out amongst the dark background. This is a long phrase, so I need to read it and really figure out how it's read. So I may not have gone where I intended to go, and there seems to be a pause, but I think I've ended up where I needed to be. So for me as a designer, I want to think of the best way to break this up, and this seems to be a nice natural break. And it's gonna need to be visually broken up because, as you can see, it's all together, it's all the same font, and I'm not really motivated to read this. It's too long, I don't want to bother with it. So we need to make this more visually interesting. So I'm going to break it right here at the natural break. I'm just going to copy this, I'm going to add in, I think I'm just going to duplicate that same box and paste it. So now I kind of have this break, and I can do two different things here. So with this photo being on the right, it makes a lot of sense. Instead of trying to fight the right alignment of this photo, I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to go ahead and go with the flow of design. So I'm going to try to do maybe a strong left alignment. So there's a couple things we can do. Let's go ahead and make these align to the left and kind of start to play around with that. So we have this beautiful space that's just waiting to be used, and we don't want to interfere with the photo. Let's go ahead and shrink this down and kind of see how everything breaks up when I reduce the space here. So right here, I don't want to have, they call this kind of hanging orphans, or I'm not quite sure the exact term. I'll go ahead and put it up on the screen. But you don't want to have an orphan. You don't want to have one or two little letters hang on the last sentence. So a lot of times I'll bring it out just a little bit to make sure I don't have just those 1 or 2 words hanging all by themselves. They just look a little too lonely out there. So what we could do is start off with a big bold statement and then kind of have a nice softer end. So I'm going to make this a bold font. I'm not sure if I want serif or script or anything yet, so we're just going to figure that out as we do this. I'm going to go ahead and spend a few minutes to kind of play around with fonts, and I'll be right back. I was playing around with the slab serif for a little bit, and I decided to stick with just a regular sans serif. This is called Assistant Bold, and I found that it also has a lighter version, so Assistant Extra Light. So I love it when I can use the same font family and have different weights because there's more consistency there. So I kind of broke these up into 2 different weights, so it kind of breaks up the way you read it, so it doesn't feel like one huge block of the same type. So that looks a little bit better. You can always play with the spacing. Let's play with the spacing between the sentences. So let's go to spacing, line height. So let's increase our line height to about 2. This is just an experiment. I'm not sure how this is going to look. Let's also increase that to 2. So now you can see how it reads with more spacing, which you may or may not like. It kind of expands to the whole block of the design, which feels nice, but I do feel like this would work if it was much longer, and since it's so short, it just feels a little stumpy. So I'm actually going to go back. I'm just going to undo the spacing I added. I think we're on a little bit better track here. So I can close the gap between the 2. And let's make sure my spacing is the same. So 1.4. Okay, that spacing is the same. I think it's the weight that makes it feel like this has more spacing. Okay, so now we can play around. It does need a little something, maybe a little graphic element. So let's go to elements. I'm just going to grab a little line or a box. See if a little line can't help us here. Sometimes I like to have a line to kind of break up large blocks of text. Just adds a little bit of a graphic element. Maybe make that shorter if possible. I do like the left alignment. I think that feels really nice with this photo. And usually when I like a text but I don't feel like it's there yet, sometimes I mess around with the photo and that seems to be what I had a problem with and not the type. So let's mess around with the photo a little bit, make it bigger, zoom in more on the subject, and see how the text kind of almost hugs her and kind of this really goes with the flow of design. And I can also change the filter on this photo, make it a little more dramatic. And we can also hug these together and put some kind of graphic element along the side. So let me rotate this. Let's make this a taller, thicker line. This is very common. How can I make that thicker? Let's see. Might need to drag in a new element. Let me do that. Let me drag in a new element. Get a shape. I just want a simple rectangle box. There we go. This will really help anchor the text, having something right here. So notice how just adding a graphic element helps this feel grounded to the design. So we can find a better appearing color if I messed around with the color a little bit. And I almost want to make the type just a hair smaller. Let's make it 18. Let's make that 18. So do we like the smaller size? Let's fit it right here. I like to have a little space and breathing room between everything. So notice how I have space here. I have lots of space between the subject matter and the type. I'm not a big fan of this color, so we're just gonna have to mess with that another time. You can drag this out, but not too thick. I think we're probably fine right about here. I probably liked it a little better the way it was before, but I think this could work too. And I'm going to noodle around with it for a few minutes and show you the final one I decided to come up with here in a minute. So we have this flyer, and I'm going to demonstrate how changing the typeface and whether it's a serif or sans serif or decorative or script really changes the mode and the overall feeling of the piece. So right now I just kind of have this standard, I believe this is Assistant Extra Light Assistant. So that's going to be your typical serif font or sans serif font. And we'll work with this first. I really like how I'm doing lowercase. So this is kind of a fun, playful, gentle kind of picture. So I'm being more gentle by using lowercase, which is a feeling you kind of get instead of screaming when you do all caps. You're really wanting to grab someone's attention. Here we're kind of wanting to be a little more playful. And so you notice how I kind of hugged the K right where the R is. They seem to kind of mold together really nicely. So this is one way, one type of approach that you could do for this. Or, since this is such a beautiful photo, I can kind of feel a serif being used. So let's try to find a really cool serif to use. I'm going to try a few decorative, kind of see how it works. So with this, it would be too overwhelming to have both of these in this very decorative script. So that's why it's nice to kind of pair these two together. But I'm not really feeling that personally, so we can have some more playful type because this is a very playful image, and that's almost too childlike. We want to be kind of upscale a little bit with this playful image. So this is a very popular font, but I have a hard time reading it. Those fonts are just so hard to read, especially if this is going to be something digital that people are only going to look at for a few seconds. Some of those decorative fonts like that one, it could be hard to read. Let's try this. This is a slab serif. Let's see how a slab serif looks. It looks pretty okay. I think what I was playing with before was fat face, a Brill fat face. That looks really nice. I really like that. So if I were to apply that to this one as well, notice how it kind of becomes overwhelming. It's too much. And so if we switch it back to a sans serif, or I'm sorry, a lighter weight, so that pairs nice together. And let me spell this correctly, marketing. Okay, that was spelled correctly. And so let's play around with some more ideas. We can make this all on one line and make it a lot smaller. And I'm not 100% sure on that serif, so let's try our sans serif. That was assistant. Let's try this one. See how that looks when we apply it. No, that's almost too childlike. I'm trying to find one, Helveticish. That's basically the Helvetica option on Canva. So Helveticish, let's see how that, oh, that's way too thick. I need a nice, really thin weight that looks really simple. Catamaran. See, that has these little details and little edges that it's competing too much with my serif. So you can see how this is a process. It doesn't just take a few minutes. You really have to trial and error a bunch of fonts because you don't know how they're really going to pair until you start to play around. Oh, Droid serif. That would be good for my serif font if I wanted to test something out. Ooh, this one's nice and thin. Oh, beautiful. Okay, so this is Hebo Thin, and I love how simplistic it is because then it counters with this way more complicated. This looks almost like a Didone serif font because you can see how there's lots of thin weights or thin strokes paired with the really, really thick overdramatic weight strokes. So you can see how that's probably a modern Didone type, a Brill fat face. And so it pairs nicely with this really simple font. So let's group these together and let's make sure they're the same size. You may have to adjust that manually. I might be able to bring those a little closer. What I'm going to do is group these and play around with the overall sizing of both of these together. So you could have this, and let me ungroup this and just separate them just a hair. This is when you just have to slowly noodle around with things. And I want to add another piece, some kind of call to action, just to kind of make a more complicated flyer. So I'm just going to drag this in. Let's see, take course now. take course. So this will be good because we can play around with another line of type to try to see if we can't get our headline and this to pair well together. So I'm just going to bring in an element. I'm going to bring in a shape. And this is just going to help us highlight our call to action a little better. Put that in a white box and send that backward. And notice how right now the headline is not really grabbing me because of the call to action is so overwhelmingly big. So that's why call to actions are generally a little bit smaller than the headline. So maybe about that size. It's about right. It's all about finding the right balance with your type. And as you can see, it just takes a lot of just playing around with options. So here is, let me go ahead and play with this headline just a tad. I do like where I kind of paired it like that. So let's bring this up here. Master marketing. So right now, this serif font is competing with this serif font for the call to action. So for the call to action, I think I'm going to switch it to whatever this is, Hebo. But I want to make that thicker, so I believe I have a bolder Hebo. So let's go down to Hebo. I think that's after G. Hebo. Where are you, Hebo? There it is. Ooh, so we have a black weight, which is super, super thick. But I don't want it to overwhelm. So what we could do is add a little more kind of elegance to this. Let's increase the spacing between the characters. And that will kind of help set it apart from this top Hebo, which is a thinner weight. So they each kind of take on their own characteristic. And since that's spread out a little bit more, I can probably get away with a Hebo a little bit lighter of a Hebo weight. So let's go, okay, so we could try regular. Make sure that's not too thin. That might be too thin, so let's split the difference and just do bold. So sorry you have to see me going through the menu system so much, but they don't really have a way to search for stuff really quickly. So I think we're just going to do a bold, not too bold, but it's also not the black weight, which is overly bold. We could even make this slightly transparent, this little box. Of course, this is more layout design than working with typography. Let's make the headline just slightly bigger. I think marketing probably needs to be bigger. So why don't we do that? We keep master the same size and make marketing a little bit bigger. Let's arrange, put that to the front so I can grab it a little bit better. So you can see kind of a little layout starting to develop here. See if I can't make that just a hair thicker. And I'm going to just kind of mess around with the colors a little bit later. So there's kind of call to action does not take away from the headline. There's enough spacing between the two that they don't feel like one big unit. They shouldn't be. It's the headline as a separate element, and then you have some kind of call to action later on. So I'm going to tweak this a little bit more, and I'll show you what the final is that I come up with in a moment.
Okay. How was that, friends?
That was super.
I think so too.
Yeah, I hope you'll put the link in the chat because there are parts of it I'd like to look at again.
Absolutely. I really love that one she worked on a quote actually, so we could see how that works. And two, she was mostly working in Canva. So I thought this was super, super helpful. I'm glad. Okay, let me stop the recording. Well, actually, before I stop the recording, I'll just say that First of all, thank you again for being here and going through this. And I hope that the others will watch the recording and we'll all be on the same page. So I think there's a lot of useful information in here. And over the next 2 weeks, let's practice these new concepts that we learned. And we will resume after the Congress, and we'll probably watch another segment on colors or color theory or something like that. But it's actually good, I think, that we have these 2 weeks to practice these new concepts, because it was a lot. You can see how much she fusses around with just a couple of words. Okay, L'chaim, greatest. I'm gonna stop the recording now because it's getting kind of long.